Genesis chapter 1, be reading the whole chapter, into chapter 2, verse 3. Hear the word of the Lord. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw that the light was good. And God separated the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. And God said, "Let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." And God made the expanse and separated the waters that were under the expanse from the waters that were above the expanse, and it was so. And God called the expanse heaven, and there was evening, and there was morning, the second day. And God said, "Let the waters under the heavens be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the waters that were gathered together he called seas. And God saw that it was good. And God said, "Let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees bearing fruit, and which is their seed, each according to its kind on the earth." And it was so. And the earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed according to their kinds, and trees bearing fruit, in which is their seed, each according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the third day. And God said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. And let them be lights in the expanse of the heavens, and to give light upon the earth." And it was so. And God called the two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars. And God set them in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth, to rule over the day and over the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the fourth day. And God said, "Let the waters swarm with swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the expanse of the heavens." So God created this great sea creatures and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarm according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas, and let birds multiply on the earth." And there was evening, and there was morning, the fifth day. And God said, "Let the earth bring forth living creatures according to their kinds, livestock and creeping things and beasts of the earth according to their kinds." And it was so. And God made the beasts of the earth according to their kinds, and the livestock according to their kinds, and everything that creeps on the ground according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. And God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth." And God said, "Behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of the earth, every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food. And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the heavens, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has breath, the breath of life, I have given every green plant for food." And it was so. And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the seventh day, God finished his work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it God rested from all his work that he had done in creation. May the Lord add his blessings to the reading of his holy word. Well, know yourself was the greatest advice of ancient Greek philosophy. They wrote a famous myth all about it. The myth of Oedipus, to illustrate the point. Oedipus didn't know himself. He didn't know where he came from. And so he ended up killing his father and marrying his mother. Maybe you've known people who don't know themselves very well. Sometimes that's tragic. Sometimes it's comical. I once saw a personal ad by someone who probably didn't know herself very well. It said, "I'm a shy 18-year-old single woman with 2 children." Shy? Really? How many kids would she have if she was outgoing, I wonder? Know yourself. To know yourself, you need to know where you came from. Who you came from is key to knowing who you are. What's your origin? That's why many people are fascinated by investigating their genealogy. They'll go to these websites, send in their DNA to find out, where they came from, who their ancestors were. They think who they come from explains who they are. But knowing where your beliefs, your culture, that is your soul, your spirit, where they come from, is really much more to the point of knowing yourself. Now, Americans are supposed to be taught that the founding fathers were champions of liberty, and so we are then supposed to be sons and daughters of liberty. Freedom lovers. We're descended from freedom lovers, and so we think we are freedom lovers. Now, over the last couple of generations, an alternative myth has arisen that the founders were actually self-serving lovers of slavery, which is mostly false. Shows they don't know history very well. They don't know the context. That they were oppressive people. They were tyrants, just interested in exploitation for themselves. And so it's no surprise that the people who believe that that's where they came, that those people are often some of the most oppressive, censorious, censorship-loving people. Your myth of origin shapes who you are. Now, probably every culture has its creation stories to explain where they came from and who they are. They're myths. They explain their identity. And we normally think of myths as just belonging to ancient primitive cultures. We don't really think we don't have myths. We just have science, we think. We're too sophisticated for myths, but we do indeed have myths. They explain who we are. When Mary and I were in Ethiopia, we got our news and entertainment from the BBC World Service Radio, and they had a program beamed into Africa, where we were, which asked us listeners, I remember this program, asked us listeners to send in their native accounts of creation myths. You could see some guy in London expecting these letters to come in, talking about these myths. The world came from a giant turtle that got turned over upside down, and we're in the bowl, something like that. And they would look so smugly on it. We know so much better than all these primitive people. But I decided I'd send in one of the dominant myths of my native culture. See how they liked it. Here's what I wrote, what I sent them. Once, an incredibly long time ago, there was nothing, absolutely nothing, but a speck of super dense matter. Where the super dense matter came from is never explained in the myth. Then, for some unexplained reason, it exploded. The material from this explosion spread out in all directions. Some of it, though, happened by the work of almighty chance to come together to form various bodies. Some of these bodies, again by the work of almighty chance, had the right composition to ignite into stars. Billions of these stars were created thus by chance. Chance also fashioned planets, quite haphazardly, of course. Around one of Chance's medium-sized stars was formed a medium-sized planet that just happened to have the right ingredients to cook up some water. And Chance took a while stewing, but finally out of the concoction sprung a set of randomly arranged chemicals that just happened to be able to replicate themselves. These chemicals, while still stewing as if in a crock pot, were transformed by the wonders of chance into cellular life, which in turn, through miracles no human mind could fathom, developed over eons into scientists to whom chance randomly selected to be the bearers of this new myth. I don't know if the people in the BBC were amused by my myth. The myth is a dominant force in our culture now. The major problem with that myth is not how, but who. Not how the universe came about, the Big Bang, physics, whatever, but who caused it. Christians too often want to argue about how it happened. But the real poison of this new secular myth is that it tells us that our Creator is only time and chance. That we're the ones, after billions and billions of rolls of the dice, who finally got lucky. That if enough monkeys dance on the typewriters, one of them will eventually write Hamlet. The myth tells us that we are only the products of time and chance. That's where we came from. That's who we are. Now imagine what kind of people you're going to get who buy into that myth. People who think that they really are nothing more than animals who happen to develop brains rather than claws. People who think that if it suits them, we can thin out the human herd by eliminating other human beings who are of a race they don't like, or maybe are the inconvenient products of a promiscuity they want to enjoy. That myth produces people who think that man really was made for bread alone. That myth produced the Holocaust, the liquidation of millions by the communists, and the abortion clinics. Genesis 1 stands in direct opposition to that secular myth. Here we find our origins about who we are. And rather than reducing human beings to a naked ape, as some scientists now call us, Genesis 1 lifts humanity up. It tells us we are much more than the lucky product of time and chance. But it simultaneously puts us in our place under God. It does this in two major parts. First, the scene setting, and then the scene. First, the scene setting. It's like arranging a stage before the play begins. And the first two verses in 4 short sentences. First, in the beginning, God created the heavens. Heavens doesn't mean like a spiritual realm where God lives away from the material world. Heavens means the universe, outer space, like in Psalm, I believe it's Psalm 9. The heavens. David is out shepherding the sheep, and he says, the heavens, looking at the stars at night. The universe declares the glory of God. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, this planet. And so the first statement is that God created all things. All matter, all stars, galaxies, the solar system, the third rock from the sun, everything. By beginning with God, in the beginning, God, we see God was already there in the beginning. The beginning here is not the beginning of God, but the beginning of His creation, of us. God is the only one without a beginning. God, by definition, is uncreated. He is the creator, and only He is the creator. Everything else is created, and that makes God infinitely higher, as transcendent, over everything else, including ourselves. Now, some false religions, like the Mormons, teach that as we are, God once was, that He evolved. And as God is, we can become, that we too can evolve to become like God. But right in the first sentence of the Bible, we see that that's not true. He is the creator, and we are created. Here is a division, then, between us and God that can never be erased. We can never become the creator, because we will always be created beings, and God will always be our creator. And when God first inspired this chapter, now it's a bold statement that all these things mentioned in this chapter, whether it be the skies or the seas or the sun or the moon, the planets, the stars, that they're only creations, creatures, only created things, and they're not gods at all. Now the pagans believed in a small g, God-filled universe. All these things are gods of different kinds. The Egyptians, for example, sometimes worship the sun, Ra. They look at the sun, there's Ra, there's a god. And so here in Genesis we are told that the sun is created. The sun's not a god at all. The true God created the sun. The sun isn't, in Greek mythology, the sun isn't Apollo, who's just making his daily rounds in his chariot across the sky. The stars aren't gods. The planets aren't gods. Mercury isn't the messenger of the gods. Venus isn't the goddess of love. And Mars isn't the god of war. They're just all creations, like us, except they're just objects, and we're created in the image of God. That God created the universe means that He created matter, even your body. And there are two extreme errors that people fall into with creation. First is materialism, the belief that matter is all that there is. Like the scientist Carl Sagan, who began his Cosmos program by declaring, here's his statement of faith: the cosmos, he says, the material universe, the cosmos is all that there is, or was, or ever will be. I'm thinking, I remember what he said, you're scientists. Okay, prove that. Scientists are supposed to have support for everything they say. Prove with science that the cosmos is all there is, or was, or ever will be. You can't. It's faith. That's his faith. But if you believe that, like him, what are you going to do? What kind of life are you going to live? You're going to live for money. You're going to live for stuff that you can buy, things you can see, you can hold, for your body, what it can feel. That's materialism. The second error is the pseudo-spirituality that some Christians fall into, that matter doesn't matter. They think nothing that is natural, material, is spiritual. This is a problem the church has struggled with and sometimes surrendered to for a long time. For a millennium, the highest form of spirituality was seen as, if you want to be really spiritual, you become a monk or a nun. And you flee the world by going off to a monastery or a convent, seeking to be spiritual there. The idea is that the truly spiritual people should escape from as much of the natural concerns of the world, the material things, as they can. Pseudo-spiritual people think the spiritual is in one realm and the natural is in another, and they have no connection to each other. No creator who made them both. Now, the Puritans didn't believe that because they were biblical. They're not pseudo-spiritual. They certainly weren't materialists, but they weren't escaping the world either. Puritan pastor Increase Mather, second generation New England Puritan, taught, quote, the works of God, it means nature, has a voice in them. The universe, natural things, has a voice in them, as well as His Word. In other words, as well as the Bible. Mather was the president of Harvard and was the first person to write a book on comets. His son, Cotton Mather, who was also a Puritan pastor, was a pioneer in developing inoculations. He's one of the fathers of vaccines. Biblical Christians are pro-science because we believe God made nature and invites us to study it and to master it. Know yourself. You're part of creation. That's the first part of the scene setting. That's from verse 1. The second statement, beginning in verse 2, the earth was without form and void, or void and desolate. In other words, it's disordered and uninhabited. It was not, immediately after creation, fit for living. To make it fit for living, God worked on it. He made it. And here we see the distinction between two things that we often confuse, creating and making. In verse 1, God created out of nothing everything. And there's a special word there in Hebrew for create. In Hebrew, it's bara. It is only used for God in the Bible. God is the only subject of that verb anywhere in the Old Testament. God creates. God is the only one who creates. We can make. That's a different word. Like God. God makes, we can make. Now, to make is to manufacture something out of pre-existing objects. Construction workers, make a building like this out of pre-existing, steel, wood, brick, glass. A cook makes a meal out of pre-existing rice, noodles, meat, vegetables. But only God can create out of nothing. In the beginning, God created everything out of nothing, and then in verse 2, started to make it fit for us because it was void and desolate. Third scene-setting statement in the middle of verse 2, and darkness was over the face of the deep. Implying, doesn't say it clearly, but it's implying that the earth was covered with water, and probably, whatever was making it dark, probably had such thick clouds that light couldn't penetrate. It was dark. Now, some scientists calculate that in the past, the earth was indeed completely covered by water. It was watery. Fourth scene-setting statement at the end of verse 2, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And the verb there, hovering, is used in Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 11, like the eagle that stirs up its nest, that flutters or hovers. That's the word there. Over its young, spreading out its wings, catching them, bearing them in its pinions. It evokes the image hovering like a hen brooding over her chicks. It suggests nurturing, care, supervision. The Spirit of God is nurturing this earth that He earlier created. And so now the stage is set for the scene to begin. So then, second part, comes the scene, starting in verse 3. The stage has been set, and so now it's time for the divine drama. There are 7 days, each of them introduced with the same refrain, like a signal, like a school bell going off. Time for class to begin. Or the rooster crowing. A new day begins. You hear the rooster. The refrain here, a new day. And God said. Every day begins with that signal. And God said. So the first day then begins in verse 3. Everything that happened just before that, before the first day, is just setting the stage for what is now happening on earth, which is where the rest of the Bible is that now played out. Earth is the stage for the divine drama. Now, in the first day, God brings light. Now, light where? Many people just kind of assume, well, let's talk about original light, the first beam of light to shine anywhere in the universe. But what was created in verse 1? Did God not create any stars that create light, that make light when He created the universe? No. Remember the context, the scene. There is darkness on the face of the deep, on earth. Now, the new light is shining here at the first day. This new light is shining where the darkness was on earth. That's why the light is called day and the darkness night. Day and night are on the surface of the earth, not in space. The scene is on earth. And God saw that it was good. Then there was evening and there was morning, the end of the day. Every day is marked as beginning and ending with, it begins with, and God said, and ends with, there was evening and there was morning, the whatever day. Another refrain is, and God saw that it was good. God repeatedly kind of steps back in this process, takes a look at the creation and declares 6 times, at least, it is good. In verses 4 and 10 and 12, 18, 21, 25. And God sees the creation in its various stages, declares, it is good. Second day in verses 6 to 8, God makes the sky with its rain-bearing clouds. There was water everywhere. Now there's a separation of water. And in the third day in verses 9 to 13, first God makes the dry land separate from the seas. This isn't the creation of the earth, as He calls it earth. In Hebrew, the word eretz. This isn't the creation of the planet. That was created in verse 1, part of the scene setting, what He's been working on, He's been hovering over previously already. And now in verses 9 to 13 of the third day, He makes islands and continents, land masses for what is to come. And then, and God said again, He just says it twice in the third day. In verse 11, on the dry land He makes plant life according to its kind. So the wide variety of species of plants with seed to reproduce. On the fourth day, in verses 14 to 19, God makes the sun to rule the day and the moon the night. Now many people misread this, like they misread a lot of this chapter, to say that God created the sun and the moon on the fourth day. But it doesn't say that. Look carefully at what it's saying in verses 14 to 19 about the fourth day. The sun and the moon would have been created like the rest of the universe in verse 1. It only says that God made them to be over the day and the night, to be lights for different times. He made them to have a particular purpose, to serve a certain role. Like maybe you've been made to be over a class of children, or made to be over a kitchen, or made to be over a cash register. It doesn't mean that you were created at that time. You know, if you just said, I've been made a teacher in the school system, you don't think, wow, you were just born yesterday? No. We understand you resisted beforehand, and you were given a role. You were made, in that sense, to be a teacher or a manager or a chef. So here, again, from the perspective of the earth, where the scene is being played out, the sun is given the role of dominating the sky, which is now apparently mostly clear, and the moon, a lesser role, at night. And the fifth day, from verses 20 to 23, God creates the aquatic animals and the birds, living creatures in the air and the water, suddenly filling what had been the uninhabited earth, swarming with swarms, it says in verse 20, teeming with life. And notice in verse 21, there's that word again, bara, from verse 1, created, as in created out of nothing. Here, animal life is created. Did you know that science still has no explanation for how life came about? It doesn't. Now, some scientists, they keep trying to prove that it could have been the product of just time and chance. Somehow inanimate chemicals in the water somehow came together and formed some kind of life. But they still haven't managed to be able to do it. The British philosopher Anthony Flew, who had been an outspoken atheist, who had been unconvinced from all the arguments for the existence of God, even directly from C.S. Lewis. He had heard C.S. Lewis himself arguing for the existence of God, unconvinced by Lewis. He came to believe in the existence of God by the fact that life is too complex to have come about by chance, that there is no natural explanation for the origins of life. And here we see that life doesn't arise, here in chapter 1, that life does not arise randomly, just by chance. If you throw enough chemicals together in the right temperature, and maybe hit it with lightning or whatever you have to do to it, and somehow it comes alive. It doesn't work. Life does not come out randomly from inanimate matter. It is created by God. The sixth day, in verses 24 to 31, comes in two parts. First, the creation of the land animals. He says he made them according to their kinds. And that phrase, he also used it earlier with plants. Here, though, he repeats it, the author repeats it 4 times, showing the enormous variety of animals according to their kinds, what Martin Luther called God's footprints. Well, this variety of animal life, God's footprints. In other words, you can see he's been there. Signs of God's creativity. And God saw that it was good. The second part of day 6 begins in verse 26. Both on day 6 shows that we're related to the animals in a way, but then distinct. Begins in verse 26. God consults with himself. He doesn't do that for anything else. He didn't consult with himself for the animals. Here comes something special. Here's the pinnacle of creation. God said, let us, interesting, a singular God speaking to himself in the plural. Let us make man, in Hebrew, Adam, or Adam, in our image, after our likeness. Now, theologians debate what the image of God is, what does it mean to be in the likeness of God. But whatever it is, it sets us apart from the animals. That's the purpose of that here in this chapter. We're made on the same day as the animals, but something is distinct about us. We're made in the likeness, the image of God. They're not. We are like God in the way the animals are not. We're unique. And so let them have dominion, rule over all the animals. Who are we? We are made in the image of God. We includes all people, human race generally, no exceptions. It doesn't mean that some people, some nations, here, the Israelites, they're in the image of God, the pagans aren't. No, it doesn't exclude any race or any age group. Those who want to treat other races as beasts or some stages of human life as dispensable, too young or too old, they show that they don't really accept that all people are God's image bearers. Know yourself. We are also created as male and female. Second half of verse 27 emphasizes both male and female are made in the image of God. That's very different, particularly in his time and his age when this was written. Aristotle, the Greek philosopher, he didn't believe women were humans. I don't know what he thought they were. They're just like animals. You just use them. But here, women too, both male and female, are made in the image of God. So a kind of sexism that denigrates women is not from God. It's a sign of the inspiration of Scripture, that is that the Bible comes from God. It's not just a product of its ancient culture, of its ancient times. And we've risen so far above that. Maybe we think smugly, well, I can appreciate the ethics, but the poetry, but we know so much better. This kind of smug attitude, we know so much better than it does, because it's just a product of its culture. No, it's not. In the very first chapter, that women are made just as much in the image of God as our men shows that this does not come from their culture. It comes from God. There's no way that their culture believed that. God told them that. Also, the sexes were made by God. Sexual identity, that is being male or female, is not a social construct. It's not something society assigns. You're not born and the doctor, I'm going to assign this person just randomly, throw a dart at a dartboard, it lands on male. I'm going to make him a boy. It's not something assigned by society. It's a divine construct. It's assigned by God. God made it. God made us equally in the image of God, but distinctly, either male or female. Now we know from biology that sexual identity is objective. That is, it's in every cell in our body, and it is unchangeable. You can't change your sex. It is that way because we know from this passage that God made us male and female. So in this one verse, made in the image of God, it destroys racism, sexism, transsexuality, deceptively now called transgenderism. It also shows the value of all human life. The child in the womb is made in the image of God. The elderly person in the nursing home who can't live by himself is made in the image of God. No kind of human being, because of race or sex or age, is any less in God's image than any other. Then in verse 28, God gives us a mission. Multiply and subdue the earth. Before he had blessed the plants, the animals to multiply, here he gives it to us as a command, a mission. Complete the work he began of making the earth, which, remember, from verse 2, was disordered, was uninhabited, was sterile, and he's been working to fill it. And now he gives that mission to us, that work to us. Make it a fit place to live and fill it with image bearers. Be life cultivators, fruitful and fertile. Now for the Canaanites, fertility, either for their crops or their animals or for their wives, multiplying people abundantly, was an obsession. One of the promises of the idol Baal, actually in Hebrew, but one of the promises of Baal was that he would grant fertility to the worshiper. In verse 11, though, we are shown that the land is fertile because the Lord spoke his word and commanded it to bear fruit. In verse 20 and 22, the waters swarm, teeming with life at his command. His command has created life. And finally, in verse 28, he does the same with us too. Be fruitful and multiply. He even gives us the food in verse 29 to sustain us. That's why we pray before eating, since our food comes from God. And so Genesis is telling us that fertility doesn't come from worshiping these idols. They're promising fertility. These idols they had. Either their idols then or our idols now. Our idols of money, things, matter, bodies, science. Indeed, living for matter. Living for dead things. Like cash, cars, houses, and jewelry. That leads to infertility. The materialistic cultures have declining birth rates, below replacement rates. So population is declining in them. The more materialistic they are, the deader they become. Living for dead things leads to deadness. If you think a lifeless universe is your creator, you're going to end up being lifeless yourself. Fertility is a gift from the one true God. Life comes from God's Word. And the Word is God. In Him, the Word of God incarnate, is life. Know yourself. Who are you? You're a creature called into being by the Word of God like the rest of creation, but over the rest of creation, more deliberately created in the image of God, so given a rank above the rest. Not just an animal. There was a TV show back. Animals are people too. No, they're not. We're not just animals. We're not a naked ape. We're not a mere product of time and chance. The myth of chance began with people saying that we could do better without God. That free of God, that humanity could then rise to new heights. Now it has ended with people being reduced to the level of beast. If we don't like a race, we say that, they're rats and can be exterminated, like the Nazis did. If we find some people inconvenient, we say that they're not persons yet. And so, it's my body, my choice. But what about ourselves? We may say that people think like that's absurd, that's disturbed. But what does our behavior show? Do we spend so much on our material things? Material luxuries? Even our pets? They're good things, right? But do we spend so much all on that we have little left over for very good things? For missions or charity? For other image bearers? Does our spending, our priorities show that we understand the difference between what is very good, people made in the image of God, and what is merely good? Does it? Know yourself. 6 times God says, it is good. Then finally, after He has made humanity, He sees it all and proclaims, it is very good. in verse 31. It's the seventh, final, concluding celebration, declaration of goodness. Only with humanity does the creation, the universe, reach that level of very goodness. So if God took pleasure in His creation, so should we. After all, it is very good. Know yourself. You're made in God's image, and God is spirit. So you're not just physical, you're not just material, but also spiritual. We're created to be like God, the Creator. So we can make like He can make. We can't create, but we can make. And we were given a mission, work, to continue God's work of making the earth, make it ordered and full of life. And like God, we not only have work, we have rest. That's why there's the day of rest, that seventh day, beginning in chapter 2. God Himself rests, and so creates a time set apart called holy. He sanctified it in verse 3. That is consecrated for putting aside our attention that we usually give to the creation and instead look to the Creator. Now, even if you believe like me that Christ has fulfilled the Sabbath law, and so you're free, still we see, even if free from the law, that we have a need for rest. We are free of a Sabbath law, but not of a Sabbath need. We were all made. It's in our bones. It's in our DNA. It's in the image that we are made in. To need a day of rest. A time to turn away from the material to the spiritual. To focus on the Creator. That's why we're here. And that day never ends. Did you notice that? Notice that there's no evening and there's no morning for the seventh day. There's no end to it. Not like the other 6 days. Because God has rested and is resting from His first creation. Know yourself. This is where we come from. This is who we are. Image bearers with a divine mission under the infinite, eternal God at rest. What about God? Who is He? Someone said, God created man in His image, and ever since man has been trying to return the favor. Have you created a God in your image, your imagination? Who is like you, a lot like you, who you think is there to help you get more material, more matter. Keep your body well. We don't know ourselves if we don't know God. We don't comprehend the magnitude of what God did when He became man, when He came in the flesh, in matter, came as Jesus. What He did on the cross, because so often we don't comprehend who we are, how small we are. It's one of the tragedies of our time. Only recently science began to see how enormous this universe is. And yet at the same time, we're so arrogant, we've forgotten we're just creatures. We've forgotten how big God is. He's the Creator. We know a lot more about how big the universe is. We've forgotten who the Creator is. He's infinite, transcendent, and we've forgotten that we're not God. The miracle is that the eternal, omnipotent, infinite God would sacrifice for us mere creatures, limited, small, infant, so tiny, sinful creatures. When we understand who God is, as the Creed puts it, God Almighty, Creator of heaven and earth, and who we are, mere creatures, when we see that, we see that God is very, very good.